This is the most important election in our lifetime, because now that we fully understand who Barack Obama is, were he to get 4 more years, the impact of 8 years of Obama would fundamentally and profoundly change this country. It is very clear that he is a Saul Alinsky radical. It's very clear that he's sincere about it, he believes it, and that's the country he'd like to create. And he's prepared to use every element of the power of the presidency to try to get there. And I think given this economy, given this deficit, given the things we've been through, if he wins re-election, he will feel vindicated, and he will be even more radical in the second term than in the first term. There's no evidence that he has any interest in moderating towards the center. Now, the gap between an America based on Saul Alinsky's principles of repudiating virtually every aspect of the American tradition and a president who believes in American exceptionalism is literally the biggest gap we've seen, I think, in an election in American history. The fact is that I believe, and Cliff and I have written about it and done movies about it, that American exceptionalism is very unique. You personify that in New Hampshire. Your state, as you can see if you go up to the state capitol, where they have a very, very nice small museum, and you can see, you all captured a British fort about 5 months before a shot was fired at Concord and Lexington. It's just that there were no shots to go around the world because they surrendered and gave you all the weapons and all the ammunition. And so it didn't count. You then wrote the first state constitution before the Declaration of Independence. Your greatest Revolutionary War hero offered the toast, live free or die, because there are things worse than death. And the Founding Father, that generation believed that. Washington, this is Washington's command flag. This flag was in front of his command post at Valley Forge. And I wear it as a reminder that when they met at the Constitutional Convention and they wrote in the Constitution that the President is Commander-in-Chief, they were presided over by somebody who had spent 8 years in the field as a Commander-in-Chief against the British Army. They understood the world was dangerous. They understood you had to be practical and prudent and realistic. They also believed that our rights came from God. That's why they write the Declaration of Independence the way they did. Our #1 founding political document says we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. That means, unlike any other society in history, we claim in our founding document our rights come from God and are therefore inalienable. It's very simple. Each of you personally is sovereign. Your rights come from God. No judge, no president, no bureaucrat can take your rights. And because you're personally sovereign, you loan power to the state. So in the American model, we the people create a constitution. Not we the politicians, not we the judges, we the people. And in that model, the state is inherently the servant of the people. In the European model, sovereignty resides in the state, and people are the servants of the state. That's why the Obama model is antithetical to the American tradition, because his model is a state-centric, bureaucratically dominated, politician-defined world. Our model is a world centered on the individual citizen, defined by God, with very limited powers given to government. That's why this will be the biggest, I think, election decision. The key short-term problem is jobs and economic growth. And all I can tell you there is that in the late 1970s, I worked with Jack Kemp, Art Lafford, Jude Winniski, Larry Kudlow, Richard Rod, and others. We developed supply-side economics as a model. Governor Reagan campaigned on it. In 1981, we passed it. By August of 1983, we were growing so rapidly that we created 1,300,000 jobs in 1 month. Now remember, everybody was grateful last month we created 200,000 jobs. In the Reagan recovery, we were creating jobs 6 times as fast. And this is important because we're in a very fragile world economy, and if we're not careful, we're going to see enormous problems. If the euro sinks, if the Middle East sinks, you'll see the world go into a much deeper depression. The only engine big enough to pull the world economy is the U.S. We are 1 out of every $4 of economic activity on the planet. And unless we're growing dynamically, unless we're creating new wealth, the planet stagnates. So we have to get back to growth. Having helped Reagan in the 80s, I watched 2 tax increases, and by 94 the economy was stagnating again. When I became Speaker, I adopted the Reagan program, and the result was we created 11 million new jobs in 4 years. We also reformed welfare, so 2 out of 3 people went back to work or went to school. And as a result, we had 4 consecutive balanced budgets for the only time in your lifetime. So we both reformed an entitlement, the only time in your lifetime, and we balanced the budget for 4 years, the only time in your lifetime, while creating 11 million new jobs. Last comment I'll make is on energy. When you watch the Iranians practice closing the Straits of Hormuz, we are very foolish not to have a national American energy strategy. Callista and I had lunch with Secretary of State George Shultz at the Reagan Library on Reagan's 100th birthday. Secretary of State Shultz said to us, how many times do we have to get hit over the head with a 2x4 to realize how dangerous it is not to have an energy strategy? I believe we should maximize the production of American energy. That will create over 1 million new American jobs. It'll save over $500 billion a year in foreign exchange. And more important, it will allow us to be free of the Middle East, to not worry about things like the Straits of Hormuz. And I never again want to see an American president bow to a Saudi king. I think we have to have an obligation to be self-reliant in the United States, not to depend on dictatorships and monarchies that are inherently not our allies. So I am running. I would love to have your vote tomorrow. This is a very important primary. The Suffolk poll came out this morning and said it is wide open. I think we have a remarkable opportunity, and I think I would make the best candidate for 2 reasons. First, I've actually done all this. I've helped develop the 1980 campaign, which was a national sweep. I helped develop 1994, which set the all-time record for increased votes for one party in an off-year election, 9 million additional votes. I've actually helped pass major tax policy, major welfare reform policy, balance the federal budget 4 times. But secondly, I think running against Obama, who's going to have $1 billion, you had better have a really big gap so that when he's done smearing, attacking, and being negative, people are still clear about what's at stake. I think that a Reagan conservative has a dramatically better chance of defeating a left-wing president than does a Massachusetts moderate. Because I think, frankly, the closer you get to Obama in your policies, the harder it is to draw a distinction. I am very much prepared to campaign against the president. I will challenge him to 7 3-hour debates in the Lincoln-Douglas tradition with a timekeeper but no moderator. And I will concede in advance that he can use a teleprompter if he wants to. After all, if you had to defend Obamacare, wouldn't you want to have a teleprompter? So I'd love to have your votes, and right now, if it's all right, I'd like to have your questions, if that's okay. Yes, sir. Well, wait, he's running over to you with a microphone.
Let me get the microphone, please.
The President wants to close 172 coal-burning electric plants. That must entail losing an awful lot of jobs, and I hear very little said about that.
Well, my view of that, I would replace the Environmental Protection Agency with a brand new Environmental Solutions Agency. I think the Environmental Protection Agency has become a radical institute of killing jobs and crippling America. I think it's filled with people who are radical environmentalists, and I think they show a total lack of common sense. The example you just used is a perfect example. In this economy at this time, to propose closing 172 coal-burning plants is utterly irrational. I mean, you literally have to wonder, where they are and what country they think they're in. But I got involved in Iowa with Senator Grassley because EPA was trying to take the same Clean Air Act, and they had decided that particulate matter didn't just involve coal-burning plants; it also involved dust. And so they were developing a dust regulation that would stop farmers from plowing on a day when it was windy, on the grounds that if you plowed when it was windy, the dust from your farm might go to the farm next door, and your dirt might pollute their dirt. And the farmers, who of course are driving down dirt roads with pickup trucks kicking up dust, are riding around going, are these guys just nuts? So I was in the middle of this argument that Senator Grassley was having, and I went to Arizona, and I was explaining it, and they broke up laughing. They said, it's worse than that. They said, we had an EPA person come out here, and they were worried because you have, in the summer, you have naturally occurring dust storms because it's a desert. And they were worried about these dust storms because they didn't fit EPA policy. And the guy from Washington said, what would you think about wetting down the dirt so it didn't have all this dust? And he said, we were trying to explain to him that the reason they call it a desert is that there is no water. Now, my view is replace EPA with a new agency with new people. The first requirement has to be common sense.
Next question. Bobby, you have one? Brian?
Sure. Speaking of replacing things, you talk about replacing Obamacare. As a business owner and as an individual, health insurance is so vitally important. From a business perspective, it does play an important role in determining how many employees and the types of employees you'll have. In order to help with the certain future of insurance, explain to us how insurance would look, say, a year into your administration.
Excuse me, Mr. Speaker, before you answer the question, that's not Mitt Romney that's asking the question.
No, he told me I have more gray hair than Mitt, so I couldn't be related to him.
No, and your hair wasn't neat enough. I knew. I knew the minute you might be his cousin, but you weren't Mitt. I knew. Well, look, what I favor, and I helped found the Center for Health Transformation to develop these ideas. I favor association plans where you can group together with other people to buy insurance as a group, so you're not paying the price of small businesses that very often pay much higher prices than do very large corporations. I favor tort reform because we did a study with Gallup and discovered that doctors practice about $800 billion a year in defensive medicine, ordering unnecessary tests and things just to have it in their record in case they get sued. I also favor the development of competitive pricing with transparency on both price and quality, so you and your employees can shop intelligently as you would in any other marketplace and can know in advance what the cost will be. And I think there are a number of steps. We believe if you had a modern customer-based health system where you had more decision-making and you had more information, you would actually take 30 to 40% of the cost of the system. We think the current system, both in its insurance company bureaucracy and in its government bureaucracy, is so inefficient that it artificially increases the cost by 30 to 40%.
Next question here, please.
Mr. Speaker, what would be your strategic plan to balance the budget?
Well, it's a good question. My strategic plan to balance the budget starts with what we did in the 90s and what I learned from Reagan and Thatcher in the 80s. First, you have two sides of this. You have the spending side and the income side. My goal would be to get the economy growing very, very aggressively and to liberate federal land and offshore development of oil and gas. Remember, every time you develop new mineral sources and you develop new energy sources on federal land, they pay royalties. So you can actually get much more revenue without raising taxes if you have an aggressive program of using federal land and using offshore oil and gas. In addition, if you get down to 4.2% unemployment, you've taken people off of food stamps, off of unemployment, off of welfare, off of Medicaid, off of public housing. You put them out earning a living, taking care of their family, and paying taxes. You have an increase in revenue and a decrease in spending. So that's the first great strategy, is rapid, dramatic economic growth and rapid, dramatic development of American energy and American mineral resources. On the spending side, it becomes, I think, three things. First is real reform. I very strongly favor Strong America Now, which is a working group that has developed the idea of applying Lean Six Sigma to the government. They believe by simply modernizing the government, you save about $500 billion a year. I believe if you brought in the American Express, Visa, and MasterCard anti-fraud system in Medicaid and Medicare alone, you save around $100 or $110 billion a year. That's how big the potential gap is. So you're talking about $1 trillion over 10 years just in not paying crooks would be an example. You also, if you have energy inadequate supply, you bring down the cost of heating oil. That means LIHEAP drops in cost because you don't need it. You're not cutting people off. You're actually having much less expensive energy, which reduces the need for subsidies. The other area is to look at serious reform. For example, we have 185 different federal bureaucracies providing help to the poor. 185. That's 185 sets of bureaucrats, 185 sets of regulations, 185 silos to state and local government, each of which then has to have somebody who fills out the paperwork dealing with that agency. We would consolidate all of those into a single block grant. Send the money to Concord and say, we trust the people of New Hampshire to care about the poor, and we want you to use the money in an intelligent way to figure out how to take care of people. And you'd have a much more efficient system that was much more effective at much lower cost. Finally, I think there are some agencies you want to get rid of. I don't understand why we have a federal Department of Housing and Urban Development at this stage. I think there are ways you could dramatically shrink that. I'm looking at the whole notion of shrinking the Department of Education dramatically, privatizing the student loan program back to get it in the private sector before you have massive corruption in the federal government, and turning most of the regulatory control back to the states. And frankly, I would challenge the states to turn most of the regulatory control back to the local governments and the local school boards. We ought to get education back to parents, teachers, and children, and away from bureaucrats, whether they're state bureaucrats or they're federal bureaucrats.
Speaker, economist Arthur Oken in the 60s was looking for a way to measure economic hardship. And he came up with a concept of what makes people miserable. No job and paying more this month for stuff that I need than I did last month. Thus, the misery index was born. And I'd like to know your comments based on your background about the index, but in particular, if you have a slogan like the one James Carville created for Bill Clinton.
Well, the closest I'd come is I want your help to rebuild the America that we love. I think that we are so off track today that we need to rebuild not just jobs. We need to rebuild teaching our children American history. We need to rebuild the work ethic. I want to modernize unemployment compensation so if you need it, you can get it, but you have to sign up for a business training program to learn a new skill while we're giving you money. I want to end the principle of ever giving somebody money for 99 weeks for doing nothing. So I think my core model is to get America rebuilt back into the kind of work-oriented, competitive country that has led the world for 200 years. And I think we can do it. I don't think we're trapped into the welfare state. So do we have one last question? Yes, right here. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Can I ask, what are your plans for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac?
Yes. This is actually because it became an ad. There's a great irony, and I didn't explain it very well. The only time I ever talked to the House Republicans about Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac was in the New York Times in July of 2008, and I urged them to vote no on bailing them out. I said, these are badly run, incompetent institutions. Don't give them any more money. My goal would be to break each of them up into 4 or 5 smaller companies and then to migrate all of them off of the government guarantee and get them back into the private sector as competitive mortgage companies. And I think they are impossible to manage at their current size, and they need to become smaller, and we need to get them away from relying on taxpayer guarantee, because when they have the taxpayer guarantee, they inevitably crowd out every competitor because their price of money is so cheap. And so I think we need to understand we want a much more competitive mortgage market, and that requires smaller competitive companies on that scale. Let me just close and say, Cliff and I look forward to meeting you individually. We'll be here for a little while to do that. I do want your vote. I would love to convince you enough that you'd actually call your friends and neighbors. This is a wide open race as of this morning. It's exactly what I thought New Hampshire would be. You folks are the best I know at deciding you're not going to decide. You have a greater capacity to be wooed over and over again than any group I've ever seen. And I know you take enormous pride in the pollsters being wrong. And so I would really, really appreciate your help, because this has gotten to be quite exciting in the last 48 hours.